So close, I know, no. You ain't got to me so excited, I already know, no. Got my eye on the goal, too close, I know, no. You ain't got to tell me so, cause I was summoned by God to be the
Welcome to another episode of Third Eye Podcast, the podcast that is dedicated to creating open dialogue and conversation regarding any and all difficult topics. I am your host, Marcus Callahan, and thank you for joining me. Last week, I did not release an episode. I took some time off because I had some family in town, and I wanted to be able to give them my full attention. But I am back this week, and this episode is a very important one. At least it is to me. At the time of this recording, November 3rd is 6 days away, which means by the time it's released, the 3rd will be 2 days away. For those of you who do not know, November 3rd is the general election for the presidency, as well as a bunch of other offices such as the Senate, House, local offices, and many more. But for this episode, I want to focus on the presidency. It's being billed as the most important election thus far, but truthfully, every election has been the most important thus far. And I'm certain it's being billed this way because this time around, it feels like there is so much at stake. And truthfully, there is. Which is why I want every person who is voting to be informed. Not just about the candidate you support, but about the other candidates as well. If you are registered to vote, then please do so. But vote informed. Today, I will be talking about the Republican and Democratic nominees, as well as giving a little bit of a spotlight on the Libertarian nominee. It's important to know exactly where everyone running for office stands, so that when it comes time to cast your ballot, you can do so with confidence. All right, before I continue, I'm putting out a disclaimer. The information that I am about to provide is not of my own opinion. It is from research that I have conducted. I will be sprinkling in my thoughts regarding different policies throughout each segment, but do not take my opinions as fact. And I will announce when I am sharing my own opinion. Okay? All right, let's jump right into the party that currently holds the office, Donald Trump and the Republicans. Now, since Trump currently holds office and is running for re-election, I figured it'd be best to sum up what he's done so far during his presidency and then discuss what he plans to do if he wins again. I'm only going to list a few key things from each year that he has served, but I will leave the link for the entire articles in the description for this episode so that you may follow up and read for yourselves. All right. On January 23rd of 2017, President Trump reinstated and expanded the Mexico City policy, which blocks funding for international organizations that perform or promote abortion. This new program is known as Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance, which now covers $8.8 billion in family planning and global health funds that go to organizations abroad, none of whom may perform or promote abortion. On February 22nd of 2017, the Department of Education, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, rescinded President Obama's guidance that required public schools to allow transgender students to use the bathrooms and showers of their choice. On April 7th, 2017, President Trump's his nominee Neil Gorsuch was confirmed to the Supreme Court. I apologize if I'm butchering his name, but it is what it is. Justice Gorsuch has already developed a reputation as a constitutional originalist who will rule the right way on religious liberty issues. Gorsuch is representative of President Trump's judicial nominees overall. On March 23rd, 2018, the White House and DoD issued a new policy allowing existing personnel to remain in the military while preventing those who have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or who had undergone gender transition surgery from joining the military. Those who are transgender and stable for 36 months could join so long as they serve in accordance with their biological sex. On October 6th of 2018, President Trump's nominee Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh is the second constitutional originalist that the president saw confirmed to the court. Also in 2018, Trump signed the groundbreaking First Step Act, a criminal justice reform bill that enacted reforms that made our justice system fairer and helps former inmates return to society. More than 90% of those benefiting from the retroactive sentencing reductions in the First Step Act were African Americans. Under Trump's leadership in 2018, the U.S. surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest producer of crude oil. The Trump administration made a deal with the European Union to increase U.S. energy exports to Europe. It withdrew the U.S. from the job-killing Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major change in trade policy. The Trump administration secured $250 billion in new trade and investment deals in China and $12 billion in Vietnam. It approved up to $12 billion in aid for farmers affected by unfair trade retaliation, but announced a total of $28 billion in aid for farmers in 2018 and 2019. Other accomplishments include a dozen hostages freed, moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, initiating historic tax cut legislation for opportunity zones, and fulfilling his campaign promise to improve the Veterans Administration. It seems as though the Trump administration was able to accomplish quite a bit during its 4 years, but it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. Trump has undergone investigation for collusion with Russia, has been impeached, although he wasn't removed from office, and the latest quote-unquote debacle from the Trump administration would be their handling of COVID-19, which, no matter how you try and spin it, it has not been handled very well, especially compared to many other countries who have gotten COVID under control. Under Trump's leadership, there have been 8,680,611 total cases. 492,026 of those were from the last 7 days. The updated death toll from COVID in the United States is 225,084. Regardless of how you may feel regarding COVID, these are the factual numbers. And though Trump has accomplished more than most choose to give him credit for, myself included, COVID-19 will always be a stain on Trump's presidency. Now, what does Trump plan to do if he is elected again? Let's find out. Trump has laid out a second-term agenda that will focus on jobs, taxes, and the economy if he is reelected. President Trump has taken credit for the booming economy that the U.S. was enjoying before the coronavirus pandemic and has vowed to rebuild it. The Trump campaign has also heavily promoted a law and order message in its policy proposals in response to the violence and protesting that has occurred in U.S. cities over the summer. Other promises in the 10-point agenda are a little more loosely worded, such as a pledge to drain the swamp. What exactly are Trump's key policy promises? For one, job creation. Trump promises to revive America's ailing economy with a huge job creation drive, vowing to create 10 million new jobs in 10 months and 1 million new small businesses. Trump also promises to build on the tax cuts he introduced in his first term, including tax cuts and credits to entice companies to keep jobs in the US rather than overseas. Trump said he will enact fair trade deals that protect American jobs, but makes little mention of how he sees his trade war with China progressing. When it comes to eradicating COVID 19, Trump has staked a lot on the hope of finding an effective vaccine for coronavirus in the coming months. The Trump administration has launched Operation Warp Speed to encourage the development and distribution of a successful vaccine. In his campaign agenda, President Trump has promised to deliver a COVID 19 vaccine by the end of the year and has made clear he will pursue an America First approach to any successful vaccine developed in the US or overseas. Under the heading Eradicate COVID 19, the campaign also lists a promise to return to normal in 2021, as well as pledges to refill stockpiles, ensure critical workers have the resources necessary, and prepare for future pandemics. When it comes to law and order, President Trump has promised to defend America's police forces in the wake of growing protests against instances of police brutality towards African Americans. Trump has leaned heavily on a law and order message, using fear-based rhetoric to discuss the Black Lives Matter movement and other protests sweeping throughout U.S. cities, and warning that America's suburbs are under threat. His campaign promises to protect police funding and hire more officers, increase punishments for attacks on police, and take action against political protest movements like the anti-fascist group Antifa. The law and order promises also include tough action on illegal immigration and stronger requirements for legal immigrants. With his tax plan, like Vice President Biden, President Trump is also trying to woo Americans with his tax plans. The president wants to retain the 37% income tax rate on high earners and has hinted at lowering the 22% rate for middle earners to 15%, though this has not been formalized by his campaign. Trump has also expressed a desire to lower capital gains tax from 23.8% to 15%, and said he wants to nudge down corporation tax from 21 to 20%. President Trump hasn't been the complete failure that most people think he has been. The truth is, like with every other presidency, there have been good things and bad things, but we as humans tend to focus on the negative rather than the positive. One positive from Trump's presidency has been what he's done for small business owners. I have a small voice note from a conservative friend of mine who happens to run a small business. I asked her to tell everyone from her perspective what she likes about Trump's presidency and campaign, and this is what she had to say.
Hey there, my name's Leah, and I'm a conservative. Although the world is changing and times are changing, there are things that have made America what it is, a country that so many would move to if given the chance. Why do people want to move to this country? Opportunity. How does opportunity come about? Through entrepreneurship and business owners. Our country is built from small businesses growing into larger businesses. I have a dream of owning a business that employs real people because I love people and I want people to succeed. Now imagine if I owned 4 boutiques and they all did about $100,000 a year in sales. Essentially, I'm making $400,000 on paper. So now I'm rich, right? Wrong. There's so much that goes into running business that everyday people do not even see. Taxes, employees, insurance, and so much more. So it'd be fair to take away from what would be my income because you think I make too much money at this mark? Just a food for thought. Trump's not a politician, and that's why people have a problem with him. Like myself, he says what he wants when he wants. I don't stop to think. He doesn't intentionally wake up and say, yes, let me piss people off today. It's just who he is. Again, think like a businessman. Did he get where he is today by not having a strong voice? Nope. Business is business, and you have to be a bulldog to make it in this industry. So why would he change how he talks just because people get offended? It's not about feelings. It's about doing what needs to be done to get America back on top. Of course, there are so many other policies and such, but this is the area that I won't back my beliefs down from.
Well, that pretty much sums up the Trump campaign. We'll be right back 1 moment after we hear from our sponsors. Now, let's move on to the Democratic nominee, Vice President Joe Biden. What does Biden stand for? Joe Biden has spent almost 5 decades in politics and is using his long experience in Washington to portray himself as a steady hand able to calm a country in chaos. A key part of his campaign is appealing to reluctant voters who have a nostalgia for the Obama era, regularly referencing his time in the administration and promising to re-enter many of the agreements formed during that time. Joe Biden has mentioned re-entering the Paris Climate Accord, the global climate agreement President Trump withdrew the U.S. from, as well as rescinding the Republicans' signature tax cuts. What are his key policy promises? On healthcare, Joe Biden has made clear that healthcare remains a top priority for him. It's an issue that is deeply personal for him. His first wife and young daughter were killed in a car crash in 1972, and his oldest son, Beau, died of brain cancer in 2015. Here's a quote from him. "I couldn't imagine what it would have been like if we didn't have the health care they needed immediately," he said during his campaign. Joe Biden said he will expand the Affordable Care Act, the signature legislative achievement of the Obama administration, which expanded health insurance to millions of Americans. Biden proposes expanding the ACA and implementing a plan that will ensure an estimated 97% of Americans. Biden says he will achieve this by offering Americans the option to enroll in a public health insurance program similar to Medicare, which offers coverage to the elderly. However, Biden does not support the universal public health insurance plan backed by progressive Democrats like Bernie Sanders. On environment, Joe Biden has laid out an ambitious climate plan, which includes overhauling the country's energy industry to achieve 100% emissions-free power by 2035. The plan includes a pledge to invest $2 trillion in clean energy infrastructure if Biden wins the White House in November, along with a promise to build 1.5 million new energy-efficient homes and social housing units. In a nod to liberal voters who have been somewhat unenthusiastic about Biden's candidacy, the Democrats said the expansive climate plan will be funded by a mix of government funding and increasing the corporate income tax rate from 21 to 28% to ask the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share. Joe Biden has shied away from mentioning a ban on fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and gas, a politically sensitive topic in battleground states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, instead focusing on incentives for car manufacturers to produce zero-emission electric vehicles. In a move that is unlikely to have pleased the U.S. oil lobby, Biden said in the second debate that he would transition from the oil industry. Trump jumped on this as a blunder, arguing it will put off voters in Texas and Pennsylvania. America and the world. A regular refrain of Joe Biden is his desire to restore America's standing on the world stage. The Democrat has shown strong support for the country's relationships with its allies, particularly the NATO alliance. He has also spoken of holding China accountable for unfair trade practices, but suggested he would tackle this through an international effort rather than through trade wars. For his tax plan, Joe Biden says he will raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans, which he defines as those who will have an income of more than $400,000 per year. He wants to impose a marginal tax rate increase, so the more a worker earns over that threshold, the more tax they must pay. Most of those affected are in the top 1 to 2% of earners in the U.S. While lower income Americans will not be taxed directly, critics of Biden's plan say workers will be forced to accept lower wages and lower investment returns because of the Democrats' planned corporate tax rises from 21% to 29%. Biden also wants capital gains and dividends to be taxed at income tax rates. On foreign policy, Joe Biden has criticized President Trump's America First nationalism, and the Democrat is much keener on building relationships with America's allies. Biden will look to repair some relationships, including with NATO and the World Health Organization. He would also rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. Biden said he would enter into another international deal with Iran, which was agreed by President Obama and ripped up by Trump. Despite pressure from the left of his party, Biden is a supporter of Israel. Biden has also suggested he would push for new sanctions on the Russian regime, and he has been critical of Brexit. Now, Joe Biden's candidacy hasn't been well liked or loved by most people. In fact, the majority of voters say they'll vote for him, but begrudgingly. This stems from Joe Biden's multiple decades in office and from some of his older policies that have been viewed as somewhat racist. Still, most voters from ages 18 through 45 say Joe is the better candidate out of the two major parties. I recently reached out on Facebook to see if there were any Biden supporters that would come forth to tell me what they liked about his plan. No one came forth. So I'll tell you what I like about his plan. I like the idea of making the 1% pay their fair share. Now, I must admit that I do believe that most entertainers who are outspoken against Trump will actually vote for him in secret because Joe Biden's tax plan is going to affect them negatively. And we all know how selfish people can be when it comes to money. That's my opinion. I hope that doesn't happen, but I would not be surprised. So I do like that he plans to make the 1% pay their fair share. I think it's long overdue. I also like the fact that he has a plan for the environment. I think climate change is one of the most important issues that we face as human beings right now. And I believe in science. I believe you have to follow the science. And I think Joe Biden believes that as well. All right. So that sums up what both the Democratic and Republican nominee are all about. But we aren't done yet. The candidate from the Libertarian Party has made some noise, and although a very long shot, I still think it's important for voters to know who else is on the ticket besides the major two. Jo Jorgensen is the 2020 Libertarian Party presidential nominee. She was nominated at the Libertarian National Convention on May 23rd, 2020, becoming the first woman to lead the party's presidential ticket. Her running mate is entrepreneur and podcaster Jeremy Cohen. Jorgensen framed her campaign as an alternative to Democratic and Republican policies she said created trillion-dollar deficits and led to involvement in expensive and deadly foreign wars. Quote, unquote, Big government mandates and programs created these problems. To solve them, we need to make government smaller, much, much smaller. She was the Libertarian vice presidential nominee in 1996. Here is what she stands for on her policies. For immigration, Jo Jorgensen's campaign website says the U.S. should not build a wall along the southern border or separate children from adults who illegally attempted to cross the border. Jorgensen supports deporting illegal immigrants who commit serious crimes, though. She opposes local law enforcement detaining illegal immigrants and transferring them to federal immigration authorities unless the crime involves a victim and is serious. For healthcare, Jo Jorgensen says Republican and Democratic policies over the past 50 years are the reason healthcare has become so expensive. Their latest proposals to fix healthcare will further micromanage your doctors and restrict your access to care while failing to solve the underlying problem. They differ only on whether this should be done by private insurance companies or government bureaucrats. This is the exact opposite of what needs to be done. We can reduce the cost of healthcare 75% by allowing real price competition and by substantially reducing government and insurance company paperwork. This will make healthcare affordable for most Americans while also reducing the cost of legacy programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA. On energy and environmental issues, Jo Jorgensen's campaign website says, I will work to remove government barriers to replacing coal burning and oil burning power plants in the United States with safe, non-polluting, high-tech nuclear power plants and allowing off-grid use of solar power. Worldwide, I believe we need to consider all scientific and economic knowledge to care for our environment, not cherry-pick data to support a predetermined outcome. Most pollution is generated in developing countries, so reducing pollution worldwide requires cost-efficient, zero-emission energy sources like nuclear. When it comes to trade, Jo Jorgensen says, the freedom to trade and travel are fundamental to human liberty. As American citizens, we should be free to travel anywhere we choose and to buy and sell anywhere in the world. As president, I will use my constitutional authority to eliminate trade barriers and tariffs and work to repeal arbitrary quotas on the number of people who can legally enter the United States to work, visit, or reside. On the economy, Jo Jorgensen says, the real cure for poverty is a vibrant economy that generates plentiful jobs and high wages, combined with an affordable cost of living. As president, I will work to eliminate policies that cripple economic growth. I will give special attention to regulations driving up the cost of housing and healthcare, as well as those creating barriers to creating new businesses or entering professions. Finally, I will work to repeal laws and regulations that prevent individuals and charitable organizations from helping those in need. When it comes to education, Jo Jorgensen says, the Department of Education has failed. In the 40 years since the Department of Education was created, government spending on education has skyrocketed while the quality of education has declined. Students used to be able to work their way through college and graduate debt-free. As president, I will work to eliminate the Department of Education and return control of education to where it belongs, with parents, teachers, and students. When it comes to gun regulations, Jo Jorgensen says she opposes additional restrictions on the process of purchasing a gun. She also opposes allowing victims of gun violence to sue firearms dealers and manufacturers. Her stance on criminal justice says that communities should determine whether police officers are required to wear body cameras. She opposes the government hiring private companies to run prisons, solitary confinement for juveniles, mandatory minimums for people charged with drug possession, and the death penalty for drug traffickers. Her campaign website says convicted criminals should have the right to vote. On foreign policy, Jo Jorgensen says, turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral, with the military force to defend America's shores and soil against any foreign attackers or invaders. Protected by an armed citizenry and by a military laser focused on defending America. No U.S. involvement in foreign wars. She's very specific about that. She would like to bring home our 200,000 plus American military personnel stationed in foreign countries, and no U.S. military aid to foreign governments. No U.S. blockades or embargoes of non-military trade. When it comes to the Supreme Court vacancy, Jo Jorgensen released a list of 18 potential Supreme Court nominees on September 23rd, 2020. She said, we need justices who, unlike the majority of those appointed to our highest court over the past 100 years, will strictly uphold our Constitution. We must restore the limits that our founders imposed on federal authority and rigorously defend both individual liberty and property rights. She initially tweeted about the Supreme Court vacancy, saying, I'm not going to comment on that until Justice Ginsburg's family has had a chance to mourn and lay her to rest. Unfortunately, the Trump administration rushed their nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, through to be sworn in, denying the American people a say in who would succeed the late, great Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Now, I also asked for any supporters of Jo Jorgensen to reach out and tell me what they liked about her campaign. And again, nobody got back to me. So I will say what I like about her campaign. I am very, very, very big on her stance when it comes to education. I think the control of education should be with the parents, teachers, and students. So I am all for the eliminating the Department of Education, as well as getting rid of or reforming student loans. I think they're criminal, but that's just my opinion. Her as an alternative to Trump and Biden is not bad. It's not what most people would say is ideal, but her campaign is not bad. Do I think she has a chance of winning? Not at all. She should have a chance, but that's not how our country works. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know that was a lot of information to consume. So please play this back as many times as needed. And I will also leave all of the links to my research in the description for this episode. Regardless of who you vote for, the important thing is to cast your vote and let your voice be heard. Do not let democracy fade away. To close out this episode, I wanted to send an open invitation to any of my listeners. At the end of November, I will be participating in a virtual convention for my podcast. I have a 30-minute slot to do a live show, and the topic that I am choosing to talk about is kindness. So if there are any listeners out there who wouldn't mind sharing a time in their lives where a true act of kindness from a stranger or a person in your life changed your views or had a positive outcome on your life, please share that with me. And you can do so by inboxing me on Facebook or Instagram. My handles will also be in the description box. If you want more information on the convention, it is called Indie Pods United, and you can go to www.indiepodsunited.com for more information. Tickets for this event are $10. It would mean the absolute world to me if you bought a ticket and supported me. Last but not least, I have a few new designs on my merch site, which is www.tpublic.com/user/RDIGN I podcast. If you want to purchase a shirt or mask or any of the other items listed on the site, I'd greatly appreciate it. Everything is on sale right now for 35% off. All right, folks. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Third Eye Podcast. I hope that this episode was very informative. I hope you take away exactly what I intended from this episode, and that's just to be informed about your vote, whether you're voting for Trump, Biden, or another candidate. I will be back next week for another episode. So until then, get out there and vote. I love you all, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Do not even try. Remember, be kind to one another and love each other. Take care.